Welcome, everybody. You're listening to AFSO 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast. Here is your host, Kevin Ferrara.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Weekend Wrap-Up. As you heard, I'm your host, Kevin Ferrara, and before we get started, as always, I just want to give a shout-out to all of our audience members out there, whether you're listening on YouTube, various podcast platforms out there. We greatly appreciate your support, your subscriptions on that. If you have not subscribed to any of our platforms out there, please give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, hit that button, hit that bell out there, because we are listening to you. We are listening to the audience members out there that are sending us information, topics, you name it when it comes to firefighter health and safety, firefighter issues. We want to hear from you, the audience members, those that are out there in the field. Yeah, I'm a volunteer firefighter here in Pennsylvania, but in order to really capture what's going on throughout the fire service, and there's a lot going on within the fire service lately. That's what we want to hear from you, the audience members. So again, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, do whatever you have to do to follow us so you can stay in tune with what we are providing out there and sharing, whether it be on the podcast channels, social media platforms, email. Head over to our parent website, afso21.com. There's a subscribe option in there. Go ahead and fill out your email, subscribe to our page. That way you are completely informed and in tune as to what we are doing here at AFSO 21 and the Weekend Wrap-Up. So we're going to actually skip a sponsor this episode, and we're doing that because there's a lot of information we want to pass on with this episode. As you know, I recently was down in North Carolina, at Wilmington, North Carolina, to the PFAS Conference, their third conference that they had. They skipped a few years from what they were saying because of COVID and everything, and I totally get that. So it was awesome to see a packed house, literally, where this venue was. They filled the room. There was audience members from literally around the world, top-notch individuals, researchers, scientists, firefighters, community members that are concerned, advocates, for PFAS remediation and regulation. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I really want to take a lot of time discussing what happened down at the conference, and we're gonna show my slides because each presenter only had about 10 minutes, and because there was just so much information, they were trying to pack it in within a couple days there. So speaking time was limited to about 10 minutes for each presenter. I want to go back over my slides and talk a little bit more in depth about what those slides showed, the information on there. We're also going to talk about some blood testing. We're going to talk about the EPA's new press release on their lifetime health advisory and how that's really going to affect not only the DoD, because they're currently going under a testing, a review process to come up with a non-fluorinated foam, but also within municipal departments, within the local community, how that revised EPA lifetime health advisory, and they're interim right now. They come out, we'll talk about it here in a second. So let me switch over to another screen here, and as you can see, if you're following us on YouTube, you're going to see these screens. If not, I'm going to do my best to go ahead and explain what's up there. And as always, I will have links in the description to things that I talk about, various pages and such. So as you saw or see up here on the screen, our first slide that we have is save the date. And now, obviously, this date has passed. But it was the third National PFAS Conference. It was June 15th through the 17th of this year down in Wilmington, North Carolina. And they picked this area because of the whole Cape Fear, contamination area that they had down there. And what I learned was that Chemours, who is one of the top 3 manufacturers of PFAS, they were dumping massive amounts of chemicals into the local area down there, and it really polluted the water sources, ground and drinking water down there. So they said, when they first started this, they said, why not have it at pretty much ground zero, where the first detectable levels of PFAS sort of popped up, and so I mean, it's you would not believe the amount of contamination that occurred down there, the amazing work that's going on by individuals in that area to really, hold the manufacturers, these chemical manufacturers, accountable for what they did to local communities, willingly did, without hesitation, did to these communities, not even really considering the environmental and health impacts that their actions were doing and had the potential to do down there. So, they talked about highly fluorinated compounds, the social and scientific discovery. And there you can see their website. If you want to see a little bit more, a lot of the stuff was recorded down there. Some speakers didn't want to be recorded. Myself, I said, yeah, I have no problem. After all, I do a podcast, so it's a no-brainer to be recorded. But there's their website, https://go.ncsu.edu/PFAS 2022. And again, I'm going to have these links up here on the podcast description, so you don't have to, go back and remember, hey, what was that website you said? So again, I flew down on the 14th, got in late, unfortunately. They had some pre-conference stuff that was going on, but the next day, we got in there, got right to it, started listening to, individuals speak. Attorney Rob Blott was there. There was just many folks that were there. I really don't want to try to name them all, because I know I'm going to forget some that were there. But the ones I was familiar with: Rob Blott, Graham Peasley, myself, Jason Burns from up in New England area. Firefighter, IAFF, Dr. DeWitt. She's been on the podcast. And like I said, many individuals that were there. So don't take it the wrong way if I don't mention a name. It's just, my gosh, there were so many people there. I lost count as to how many and who was who. I was trying to take some pictures of some folks and say, hey, this way I can create a contact. I got your picture. I got your name tag. It was just that type of conference. And that's something I highly recommend if you attend these type of conferences. Don't be awkward when you do it, but just walk up and say, hey, can I, for reference, can I, take a picture of you and your name tag, so I know who we talked to, because we were handing out business cards left and right. And it's a name is great, but I like putting a face to that name. So shout out to everybody that was in attendance. Much appreciated for the warm reception, the welcoming me down there as a speaker, and really to be able to network with so many individuals. So audience members, if you get a chance to go to these type of conferences, I highly encourage you to do so. So my slides, we're going to get right into what my presentation was, and then we'll talk about some other stuff that happened down there during the conference. So, my slides is AFFF PFAS in the DoD. Title, it's just soap and water. You've probably heard me give this speech, some of you, in the past, or reference it. That's my name, Kevin Ferrara, Master Sergeant, U.S. Air Force, retired. I don't hold anything back. I tell people I retired in 2017 as a Master Sergeant. I'm now an owner, consultant, podcast for APSO 21 LLC. So that whole, in quotations, it's just soap and water. Folks, I've said this in the past. I've talked to many, many, many firefighters out there, former and even current military and DoD civilian firefighters. That was the narrative. That was the statement that we were told time and time again. It's just soap and water. AFFF is soap and water. It's perfectly safe. And we took it. We took it on that. We took their word. We said, hey, this stuff's just soap and water. So let's go ahead and wash our uniforms, wash the trucks, wash the stall floors, because this stuff was a fantastic degreaser. Because of the surfactants and of the PFAS chemicals, they actually lifted off those chemicals, that grease. And if you wanted your truck, spotless, if you wanted those stall floors where the oil was dripping, it lifted that stuff right off and made things nice and squeaky clean. Unfortunately, we also sprayed kids down during fire prevention visits because we thought, hey, it's just foam, it's soap and water. We dumped the concentrate. We sprayed each other with this stuff, for, going away, events. And those, it's not hazing, it's morale boosting. So, we would do some crazy stuff. One of them included, spraying each other with foam, and just, that was our way of saying, hey, much appreciated. We respect and love each other, and had a great time, and it was the morale. That's what the firehouse was. Now really can't do so much, and obviously we don't want to do it with firefighting foam. Because we now know it's not soap and water. It is literally toxic. So, I spoke about when I first started Chanute Air Force Base in Ranto, Illinois. The base was open from 65 to 93. It closed in 93. And, thousands, tens, potentially over 100,000 or more DoD military firefighters from, all branches went through Chanute Air Force Base for their initial fire apprentice training, and then advanced courses. That was the DoD Academy at the time, and then of course in '93 when they closed, they transferred everything down to Goodfellow Air Force Base down in San Angelo, Texas, and that's where the DoD Academy is today. Unfortunately, that academy has PFAS contamination as well because of the firefighting foam. Despite what some DoD members are saying, leaders, they're trying to come back and say, oh, there's no contamination in San Angelo. Well, there is, because they've done testing, they've found it. They've tested on and off the installation. And in fact, they provided bottled water to residents in the San Angelo area, a certain distance from the base, because they found PFAS in drinking water. So their drinking wells were contaminated. So the DoD came out and they said, hey, we're going to give you some pallets of water. We're going to check that box because, we don't want you drinking polluted water from our installation. So until we get it cleaned up and everything, here's a few bottles of water. Well, that lasted for several months, and then all of a sudden the water got cut off. And, what's the status on the PFAS contamination? We really don't know. Do we trust the numbers, the levels, detection levels that the DoD is providing? Take it with a grain of salt. It's almost like, people joke internal affairs with law enforcement. You're investigating yourselves. So how unbiased can you be? And I'm not saying the DoD is biased in terms of their numbers, but I've always said if you're going to do testing, it really needs to be a third-party independent, somebody that's non-biased, somebody that has no affiliation whatsoever with these installations and the community members. They come in, they do the testing, they provide a neutral party analysis of it, and then provide those results. Really, that's how it needs to be done, but it's not. So it's contractors. The federal government hires contractors to come in. Well, are these federal contractors unbiased? That's a whole nother topic we could get into, because they, at that point, they are a representative of the DoD when they do these testing. So really, it needs to be third-party, neutral, non-biased, non-affiliated folks that really, they can say we have no stake in the game, but everybody in the world has a stake in the game because of PFAS contamination. It's all over the place. So as you see on the pictures here, those that are listening, we got 3 graphics up here on the slide. I had some firefighters that had sent me some photos, a little while back, and these really show what we as firefighters were going through at Chanute. In terms of the large frame mock-ups, the large frame burn aircraft trainer fires, and we would literally pour. We would watch them pour, hundreds to thousands of gallons of flammable liquid, and at the time it was JP8 fuel, and really who knows what else was in there. Because other places I've been to, you watch the flames, and it's it's a rainbow. So it's like, okay, that's really not jet fuel. What else is in there? But we never knew. But you see, these firefighters, they're advancing hand lines, not wearing air packs, because that's what we did. Even when I went through in '91, depending on the type of fire we were fighting, we may or may not have worn air packs at the time. They had the big old hoods that covered your head. You look like a spaceman walking through there. But all of that foam is the trucks behind you, the old P4s, P2s, P19s. They were spraying that foam, the raindrop effect, mass application raindrop effect. And it literally rained down on top of the firefighters that were going in. Saturated, completely saturated their turnout gear. As firefighters took that gear off, they came in direct contact with the AFFF and whatever chemicals that were on the proximity suits. And, things weren't really washed. They were rinsed off, because proximity gear, you can't wash it. As we can with structural gear. You can't put it in a laundry machine or an extractor and wash it. It's pretty much hand wash. Well, hand wash isn't going to get really anything clean. Maybe the surface, and that's about it. It's not going to be a deep penetrating clean or cleansing operation as it should be. So we talked a little bit, about Chanute, how many folks that went through there. Obviously PFAS contamination, it's still there. They really, the Air Force is responsible for cleanup at Chanute Air Force Base, and they really haven't done a whole heck of a lot there. In terms of remediation efforts. You go out there today and you're going to see signs, either on base or just off base, with some of the farm fields that says, hey, these crops are not intended for human consumption. And really the reason for that is because of the PFAS contamination. Those plants, those crops are absorbing that PFAS contamination, but the problem is they're feeding it to livestock like cows, which are then processed and sold to local economy to unsuspecting individuals. So that whole food chain, you can say, yeah, it's not meant for human consumption, but okay, we're going to feed it to our livestock, and then we're going to butcher our livestock and then feed that meat to the humans. So it's still there. You're still consuming PFAS. You're just taking a longer route of exposure, if you will, before it gets to you. So, why they put these signs up and think, oh, well, if it gets into the livestock, somehow it'll get filtered out. That's not how it works, folks. It's, and we've seen that, in other areas. So, speaking of other areas, and it was interesting because the day that I talked, Thursday, most of the folks that were speaking that day were referencing things in my slides. Now, nobody had seen my slides until when I actually presented them. So it was interesting to hear the commonalities among different locations throughout the country, throughout the world, and then they were talking about the Highland Dairy Farm in Clovis, New Mexico, with cows being contaminated and everything. And I brought up I brought up some graphics, an overhead map that shows, where the fire training pit was and where the Highland Dairy Farm was, the correlation between the two. And it's like, well, okay, this is where they did the testing on the installation. But unfortunately, that's not where all the PFAS contamination is. That's not where we discharge daily our apparatus. When we did our daily operational checks on the trucks or when we did line standby, we would go out there in the morning, shoot the foam a little bit, make sure everything worked. We'd check out the trucks. Because if flying went up early, we didn't have time to check the trucks out in the stalls. So we would just drive out to the line standby position and check the trucks out while we were out there. It made total sense to do that. But we would discharge foam in that one little area. Those that are familiar with Canon back in the 90s, where I'm talking about, where we did line standby. So I highly doubt, and I told the audience, at the conference, I said, I highly doubt that they tested these other areas, and not just a Canon. I mean, we're talking about every military installation where foam was used. They sort of had their blinders on. They said, okay, we're going to test the fire training grounds, but we're not going to test all of these other sites, and that's what they really need to do. They need to test these other sites in order to find this stuff. So the next graphic I put up there is actually, it shows the aquifer system. It shows those two arrows where the fire training pit was, where the Highland Dairy Farm was, and you can really get a good grasp, a visual of how that foam got into the ground. The sandy soil permeated through the ground, found its way into the aquifer system, the underground streams, and ended up over in the Highland Dairy Farm area and beyond, where drinking wells were put, and water was pulled out for livestock, for human consumption. So you tie the two together. It's like, yeah, okay, it's obvious. Contamination came from Cannon Air Force Base. Because, those that are familiar with Cannon, there's literally nothing around that base other than farm fields. So it's not like, PFAS is being dumped in these fields. It's not like somebody's bringing in toxic containers and saying, hey, under the cover of darkness, middle of the night, we're going to go out in these fields and we're going to dump, thousands of gallons of PFAS. Now that doesn't happen. You only see that, in the movies, well, it does happen around chemical manufacturing sites. But, for this area, that's not what happened. All of the PFAS contamination, very likely, with almost 100% certainty, originated from Cannon Air Force Base because of AFFF being released, whether it was from the apparatus or from the hangar fire suppression systems. So I talked a little bit briefly about the DoD. They issued several statements on AFFF. They said, DoD drinking water contamination report to Congress, July of 2019. As we went through it, they said, the current DoD and service policies prohibit using AFFF with PFAS for testing, maintenance, or training exercises, with the exception of shipboard activities. And I highlighted that, and I told, and there was a few folks from the Navy in the audience. There was one in uniform, and I know there was a few others down there. I specifically highlighted that prior to the conference, anticipating there was going to be some military members down there. So you look at AFFF. So they say, okay, yeah, you can't, you can't really use AFFF with PFAS in it, other than for an actual emergency on land, land-based areas. So when it comes to shipboard activities, and I showed some folks here in the coming slides, pictures of the Navy actually using this. Those that are in the Navy, you wash the decks on aircraft carriers, in the hangars. They dump this stuff. They do foam testing. Every aircraft carrier carries about 20,000 gallons of AFFF concentrate. It's fluorinated AFFF. It's, toxic foam. But yet they have members using this stuff without proper protective equipment. And that sort of shocked the audience members. They figured, okay, we everybody in the audience, they're aware of what PFAS is, AFFF. We know it's toxic. They expected individuals to have personal protective equipment on, and as I showed them in the coming slides here, the pictures don't lie. It's plain as day. They're not protecting themselves, and leadership is really sitting back and watching, watching what's going on, and it's funny during the conference, somebody had said, and I've had some people reach out to me and say this to me personally, is that I'm the guy that scares the DoD. And at first I was like, how can that be? Here I am, I'm a retiree, I'm one person. But then I got to thinking about it, and people were telling me, it's like, you have a voice, you have a following, you have firsthand knowledge of things that the DoD probably does not want the public to know, and that being how AFFF was released on a daily basis. Because they're sort of closing themselves off to the public at this point. They're really, there's very few cases to where they're working with local officials in terms of remediation. You look up in Michigan, they were supposed to take $13.5 million and do remediation efforts, but they come back and they said, oh no, we're going to take that $13.5 million and use it for more research and testing. That's not what Congressman Dan Kildee got the money for. He got the money for the Air Force to start cleaning up the former Wordsmith military installation, but the Air Force is coming back saying, no, not so much. We're going to do more research and testing. And you've heard me talk about this before in another podcast, to where it's like that $13.5 million is going to go towards federal contract. They're going to pay a few people because, when I was a federal contractor, I made six figures, easily six figures. And there was multiples of us on a certain project. So, per year, it's very easy to drop millions of dollars annually on a contract that could be negotiated to go 5 years. So, you start doing the math, you see, all of that $13.5 million gets ate up really quick in just salaries. You may not get a final product out of the contractors that says, yeah, here's what we found. And then even if you do get that final product, that end product, the DoD may or may not accept it. I've done some things, as a federal contractor when I worked there, and I provided some information, factual information, that said, hey, you really need to do this because you're, with the financials and how things were being operated, they really needed to do better. And I provided all of that and said, here's what I, as a contractor, this is what you tasked me to do. Here's what I found. Here's my course of actions I suggest. The Air Force come back and said, well, thanks, but we're going to go this route. And I'm like, okay, so essentially you just paid me to do nothing. And folks, that's what happens in the federal government system, in the federal contract system. Just because there's a contractor in place does not mean their product, their deliverables, as they call them, are going to be accepted. Most of the time they get refused, and then you got to go back and redo it. So it's as one contractor had said, it's the CSP, Continued Salary Program. They just keep going and going and provide these deliverables, make the client happy while they're collecting money. And that was really, I'm getting off topic here with the slides, but that was, for me as an individual, ethically, I just could not continue with going down that path. Fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayer money, continued salary program, that was just not me. And I left. I left that six-figure job, and now I'm doing what I do, as a private consultant, as a subject matter expert, a supporter of, other organizations out there, to do the right thing. And I will be completely upfront, about things, whereas, contractors and stuff, maybe not so much. So getting back on topic, getting back on topic, with the exception of shipboard activities, like I said, the Navy, for some reason, they look at, personnel on an aircraft carrier and say, okay, we're going to assume the risk on your behalf and, expose you to PFAS. Additional guidance that was out there. In 2015, the Air Force Fire Chief at the time issued guidance to cease all daily AFFF testing, and to contain any AFFF release during an incident. It's interesting because I remember when this guidance came out and they say, okay, stop all daily testing, no more. AFFF is only to be used for, actual emergencies. And then in 17, Headquarters Air Force, or HAF, created a tasker discussing the liability of off-base incidents and revision of mutual aid agreements. And this is something I talked about, I highlighted down there at the conference as well, is that for municipal departments off the installation, this mutual aid agreement, basically it was revised because they knew there was going to be a huge liability. The Air Force and the DoD knew there was a potential for huge liability if they provided AFFF to an off-base fire department. It got into the environment, and then there was cleanup involved. So the Air Force, the DoD, come up with this revised mutual aid agreement. Their attorneys got involved and said, yeah, let's go ahead and word this to where we release ourselves from any liability. Once the off-base municipality, fire chief, whoever signs this mutual aid agreement, they, in essence, upon their signature, will accept liability. So what happens is, say, Base X gets dispatched to support City A for a fire. Well, Base X comes out, they provide, thousands of gallons of AFFF. City A uses that product. They've already signed a mutual aid agreement. So now all of that product that is sitting on the ground, being absorbed into the soil, into the groundwater, drinking water, City A is now liable for all of that environmental cleanup. Meanwhile, Base X is like, we have a mutual aid agreement in place. We've wiped our hands clean. We are no longer liable. So I've actually had a few communities and fire service leaders, off base leaders, contact me to where they said, hey, our attorney looked at this and has a lot of questions with it. Should we sign that? And I'm like, absolutely not, because once you sign that, you're assuming, you're accepting that responsibility, that liability for environmental cleanup, or if somebody gets injured because of the foam. So I'm like, do not sign it. Just avoid that whatsoever, or force them to come up with force the DoD or the Air Force to come up with a new mutual aid agreement that takes that liability, that waiver of liability out. Because it's just, and that's the legal, the legal loopholes and things that attorneys love putting in there. And I'm not knocking attorneys. There's a lot of great attorneys. I met a lot of great attorneys at the conference that were down there, but you'll have attorneys for the federal government, the military. Same thing with the foam manufacturers. They come up with these little legal verbiage that when you start reading the fine print, it eliminates it waives any liability from them and puts it back on the end user. And we're actually dealing with that here in Pennsylvania with some legislation to where they want to prohibit Class B foam that has intentionally used PFAS in it, that manufacturers intentionally had put PFAS into this Class B foam. So they want to prohibit that. But they go on, they say, well, nothing really prohibits, they want to prohibit the use of it. Let me clarify that. They want to prohibit the use of it. So they go in and they say, well, nothing prohibits the manufacturer from producing this, but if they do, they got to put a warning label on there. And then as the verbiage goes through, it says, well, if it is used by an individual, organization, fire department specifically, the first offense is like a $5,000 fine. And it's like, wait a second. So you're going to punish the fire department, but not the foam manufacturer. So I'm working with state legislators to get that revised. Obviously, they did not read the bill that they introduced. They did not read their own verbiage and think about this. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the podcast. So going back to the last statement here on this additional guidance, in 2020, the NDAA states the Secretary of Defense shall prohibit uncontrolled release of AFFF at military installations except during an emergency. So if you read the NDAA, it clearly states at military installations. There's no mention regarding off-base emergencies. So because of that lack of verbiage, I brought up about the Albuquerque, New Mexico recycling plant fire that happened back in September of 2020. And now this was in the middle of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was a large fire. They had bundles or bales of recycled material that had caught fire. So the local fire department, Albuquerque firefighters, were struggling to get this thing put out. It was a lot of plastics, a lot of, petroleum-based products. So they contacted Kirtland Air Force Base. They said, hey, can you guys come out, with a crash truck, whatever, help us, try to knock this fire out. So Kirtland provided a P-23, 1,000-gallon foam trailer, and about 6 firefighters. So they come out. Estimated approximately about 1,500 gallons of AFFF concentrate was used on this fire. Those that are in the military, we were always taught mass application. Anytime you have an aircraft fire, petroleum liquid fire, flammable liquid fire, mass application. Keep dumping AFFF on top of this. Try to knock the fire out. Well, the graphic that those watching on YouTube can see here is a picture of Albuquerque firefighters. They've got an aerial put up. You've got Kirtland's P-23 tucked in the corner there, just massively discharging foam. And all of that foam is not it's not on the products that are burning. It's literally laying in the parking lot of this facility. And it looks like it snowed in the middle of Albuquerque, which is absolutely insane. And that tells several things. This image shows several problems with foam application. And right off the bat, it tells me these firefighters don't know how to properly apply AFFF. If you have all of this AFFF filling up the parking lot behind the apparatus, something's wrong. That's telling me you've got a lot of runoff that's coming off of this products. Mass application, just simply pouring it nonstop water, foam onto these products. All you're doing is washing off what you've already put on. You're only getting a portion onto this fire. And AFFF is designed, it's not like Class A to where, some Class A's, it'll actually stick to whatever's burning. Class B, especially AFFF, is designed to create a thin barrier between the flammable liquid and the ambient air. So it essentially, it's snuffing out the fire. It's cutting off, not only heat, but also oxygen. and fuel. We can get into the whole fire triangle, fire tetrahedron thing. So it's AFFF is designed to create a barrier, so you don't have a reignition. And those that went through Chinook, those that went through Goodfellow, those that have live fire training pits, if you disturb that barrier, that blanket, if you will, and you're next to a fuel source, if that fuel is still hot enough to where that ignition, it's near that ignition point, and you come near a source of ignition, flame, if you will, you disturb that blanket, that fuel is going to reignite. That was something our instructors always taught, is like, don't disturb the blanket. If you fall down, there's a very good chance, you may be consumed by fire because it's going to reignite. JP8 was a little bit more volatile than JP4 and diesel fuel at the time, but yeah, that's so in this situation in Albuquerque, there's no chance for that barrier because you're dealing with bales or bundles of recycled material, and it's mostly plastics that they've baled into these little cubes and stacked up. I'm looking at the graphic. They probably got about 5-6 high. You're probably looking at about 15-20 feet high in some cases. So that barrier has no chance to be created. So all you're doing is really just like washing a car. Nothing is sticking to this, so things continue to burn, and all of that agent that you're applying, that mass application you think is doing well, look behind you because that's where it's all laying. It's not on the things that are burning. So next graphic I have is just a close-up. It shows the P23. They got both the roof and bumper turret on there. The roof is pretty much a straight stream. The bumper turret's in a dispersed pattern. They've got a 5-inch line tied into the truck, so they can just continuously feed that, resurface it with water. This graphic doesn't show, at least I don't see it, to where they're tied into a foam trailer. But I think they did that later on. So they're, continuous, resurfacing the apparatus. But again, mass application in this picture, this graphic, all of that foam is dripping off of the bales that are burning and just flowing under the truck, in behind into the parking lot where it's being essentially wasted. And a lot of this product did travel off the property into these drain basins that go through the city. So now you don't have the containment as if this was on an installation, they would have been required to contain this spillage. But since it's off the installation, the NDAA doesn't require the military to contain that. So again, this is where it goes back to the liability. Was the Albuquerque firefighters responsible for containing all of this effluent, this extra foam and water that they didn't, that was really going to waste? How did they contain that? And it's very likely a lot of this got into stormwater systems and got into the ground somewhere or into drinking water sources. Another close-up graphic on here shows a couple firefighters actually standing next to the P23 with a bale of flammable materials behind the P23. They got some flames coming off of that. But again, it just shows these firefighters are not, their situational awareness was not being used at the time, because they should have known when this happened. They should have known that AFFF that they were releasing was toxic. It was hazardous. You needed to wear proper PPE. You can see there's somebody up there with just a duty uniform on. They got a vest right next to the truck. There's a couple firefighters just wearing their turnout pants and just a t-shirt and helmet that are wading through, and it looks like it's about 2.5 feet thick foam blanket right next to the truck. That's great. You're protecting the driveway, but you're not putting the fire out, folks. So So the next graphic that come up, I showed the audience, and there was a little bit of a whoa, in the crowd. The typical, the hangar fire suppression systems that had dumped. It shows them on there, and I showed them, the upper left and the lower right corners of this graphic. The upper left shows Marine Corps Air Station Futenma, and you've heard me talk about this in previous podcasts, to where that installation dumped 60,000 gallons of high expansion foam. Excuse me. 35,000 gallons of that got off the installation. And the only way the public really knew about it was because on the lower right, there's a still shot of a video. It shows these huge foam clouds floating down through the local area from a stream, because the AFFF did get into this stream. Now they, both the Marine Corps and the Japanese officials had stated that is not a drinking water source. However, I can't believe that people, you just see some water there, somehow it's not affecting individuals. So whether they're drinking it or not, they're in close proximity to this, and it very well has contaminated those that have come in contact with it. So there's various routes of exposure. You don't have to drink it. Your skin can absorb it. You can inhale it. That's a big concern, especially with high expansion foam, is that you inhale the foam. So in this graphic, and again, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, I encourage you to do so you can see these graphics that I put up on these episodes. The upper right picture shows firefighters, to include a chief officer, white shirt. They have a ventilation blower. They're literally blowing this foam out on the ramp in front of the hangar to try to break it up and move it. Well, as they're blowing that foam away from them, you can see the little suds moving around them. They're inhaling small particles of this high expansion foam, whether they know it or not. They are inhaling it. Same thing with the other graphics. It shows some firefighters in proximity gear, no SCBA, wading through waist deep of foam. You've got an individual in the center there. They've done a hangar dump. Looks like an initial testing. You have an individual completely covered in foam. He's got a bucket, probably collecting it to see what the concentrate level is. Again, inhalation of this foam. People don't think about that. It's like, I have to, it's got to get on my skin for me to be exposed. No, and inhalation is the worst, because that's, it's getting into your lungs. That's why it causes respiratory problems. As your body converts oxygen, it puts it into the blood, that those PFAS compounds that you've now inhaled are being absorbed into your bloodstream. Whereas skin, it may take a little bit longer, but your inhalation exposure, it's almost instantaneous to get into your blood. So think about that as you're out there. So the next graphic slide that I have, it shows naval personnel using AFFF on an aircraft carrier deck. They're actually hosing it down using push brooms to go ahead and clean the deck. Again, why do they use AFFF? Oh, because it's got surfactants in it that actually lift off those petroleum-based products, whether it's aircraft fuel, oils, whatever it is. It's actually cleaning that deck. So, the mentality is, why not use it? We have 20,000 gallons of it. Let's do a foam test. Let's clean the deck. But the majority of these individuals, especially in the hangar, and they're not only using push brooms, they're using a hand line to go ahead and I suppose they're trying to dilute it. Thinking, the more water I add to this foam concentrate, the less toxic it'll be. No, that's not how it works. So they're not wearing proper PPE. They're really just using Some of them, it looks like just t-shirts, some coveralls. They've got some rubber fire boots in there. One guy, he's getting sprayed. He's in a rain suit, rain jacket, and pants, but no gloves, just regular duty uniform. It's just a cleanup detail. And hey, it's soap and water, and it's amazing to see. So that's why the Navy, knowing that this stuff is toxic for whatever reason, they put in there, they got included that provision in the NDAA to exempt themselves from using AFFF for training and other purposes. So they're exposed almost all the time. So next slide I have up, I talked about U.S. military installations with PFAS levels more than 1 million part per trillion. We talked about a few of them. Patrick Air Force Base, there were some folks in the audience at the conference that were down in that area, 4.3 million parts per trillion. My base, my last assignment, Langley Air Force Base, 2.2 million parts per trillion. And it was it was very appropriate that I was interviewed by WTKR out of Norfolk, and about PFAS contamination. They've been running several stories about PFAS contamination in the Hampton Roads area, and somebody had sent me a link, said, "Hey, check this out." I watched the story, so I immediately responded back to WTKR. Said, "Hey, guess what? I was at Langley Air Force Base. I could tell you what happened there and what happens throughout the DoD in terms of PFAS, AFFF contamination and exposure." So they contacted me. They said, "Hey, we want to do an interview." We did a Zoom interview because of the distance. And as I was giving my presentation at the conference, the news story was aired on or about the same time. After I had completed my presentation, I sat down and just refreshed my screen, and there it was, the investigative report with me being interviewed. And so it was really appropriate that at the same time that happened. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier. Folks had said, "Kev, you scare the DOD," and it's because I'm not afraid to go on camera. I'm not afraid to go out there and be a voice of so many firefighters, whether they're active duty or former firefighters. And I get it, audience members out there that are active duty. I get it, and I appreciate you wanting to remain anonymous. I've always said, if something is sent to me, don't send it through your normal email unless you absolutely don't care. Create a Gmail account, create some other account, send it to me so I have no idea whose name is attached to that. Redact information. I redact information upon request. Like I said, very few will say, "Hey, yeah, I have no problem." It's usually the former firefighters that says, "Hey, I have no problem putting my name out there." But I do everything I can to protect firefighters out there, especially those that are still on the job, because you have families to support. You have to put food on the table. The end goal is to survive, to get to retirement age and live out the rest of your life. Hopefully, you're not sick, and you're happy and able to live a long life. Unfortunately, a lot of firefighters we know are not able to do that. So that's why me, as an advocate for firefighter health and safety protections, especially with PFAS, I put myself out there. And could I be more tactful? Probably so, but hey, it's if people are afraid of me, especially DoD leaders in fire emergency services, and you know who you are, because I've heard. Let's just put it that way. I've heard DoD, Air Force leaders, fire emergency service leaders are afraid to talk to me. I've tried to reach out and said, "Look, let's just have a conversation." Let's. I'm not here to throw knives, swords, anybody under the bus, but when people are silent, especially when you see numbers like this at military installations, and these folks know. Let's have a conversation. We can help each other. Don't be afraid to talk. That's my biggest thing is, it's when you go silent, that raises a lot of questions, and the public is angry. The public is angry. They want to know what is going on. Military, whether you're a brand new recruit or a senior leader, the Secretary of Defense, you're all public servants. You all work for the taxpayers. You have an obligation to do the right thing. If you see something wrong, you have an obligation to speak up and prevent that wrong from occurring, especially when it comes to PFAS contamination. So, yeah. So again, I'm the guy that scares the DoD. I'll gladly accept that. I have no ill will or intent against anybody. I'm just here to state the facts, and the facts are there are multiple military installations that have extreme levels of PFAS contamination, and yet those that are on these installations are not saying a word about it to the public. And that's really what the WTKR interview was about, is that they've tried reaching out to the DoD. The DoD is silent. I said, don't expect them to even respond back to you. Because they don't want to put somebody in front of a camera that's going to say the wrong thing and then open themselves up to liability or litigation. So that their best choice at this time, they feel, is just to remain silent, which that's okay. But again, your silence, does it show you're guilty? May or may not. It's all up to interpretation. But so again, I said, I'll speak up. I'll talk about it. I'll probably get flack. I don't care. That's what I do here. So the graphic I have up on the screen here, it shows Langley Air Force Base. It shows where the fire training pit was. It shows where the fire department was. And it shows what's most important is the northwest branch of the Back River that surrounds, that Back River. Those familiar with Langley, they know about 2/3 or half, looking at this picture, is surrounded by water. Half the installation is surrounded by water. Where the fire training ground was in the northern section of Langley Air Force Base, that groundwater contamination, very likely, and I suspect the DoD has not tested the Back River area. There's a wildlife refuge area to the north of this fire training grounds area. Those that are familiar with it, they put up a nice little observation area. It's protected. It's a little wildlife preserve area. There isn't a wildlife preserve area to the east of that area as well. It's over in the Pocosin area. But it's very likely that PFAS contamination has found its way from groundwater into this Back River area. And on any given day, I've said this, and I told the reporter from WTKR that any given day you can see people out there in boats dropping crab pots, fishing. They take that catch down to Hampton area or other areas, sell them in seafood markets to unsuspecting consumers that are buying this seafood that's very likely contaminated with PFAS, probably high levels, and then they're consuming it. So, again, you may not be near a military installation. You may not be near AFFF or turnout gear that we know has PFAS in it, but you're eating seafood and other products that very likely does have PFAS in it. So again, it's that food chain cross-contamination. So one thing I talked about, and something that was a topic of discussion throughout the conference, was that PFAS blood testing. So in 2020, the NDAA Title 7, Section 707, there was a provision of blood testing for firefighters, the Department of Defense, to determine exposure to polyfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I think I said that twice, but basically PFAS. Perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, so PFAS. that provision in there, it began in October 2020, but they defined firefighter as someone whose primary job or military occupational specialty is being a firefighter. So when we look back at the Navy with all those personnel, those deckhands that were working on the deck of the aircraft carrier and the hangars, on ships, marine vessels, they are not considered a firefighter, and therefore they cannot get their blood tested. I've talked to several former naval personnel. They're like, hey, yes, all Navy personnel have to go through, the basics of firefighting, because once you're on a ship, everybody needs to know how to fight fire, but that's not your assigned MOS, career field, whatever it is. Like in the Navy, it's, damage controlman, whatever they're calling it today. Air Force, it's firefighter, Marines, firefighter, Army, firefighter, all that stuff. So that's not their primary job. So therefore, they cannot get a blood test. These blood tests are performed during annual physical exam. The big thing is if you miss it, you have to wait until the following year. Now, I've had some folks reach out to me, especially during the conference. They said, hey, I just went to try to get my blood test done, and the doc said, there's no more money, so we can't get our blood test. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? There's no money. Congress has allocated funding for blood testing. It's there. There's money for it. So if you are active duty, current, either military or DoD civilian, and you go to get your blood test done, and you are told, nope, can't get it done because we have no money or we're no longer testing, reach out to me. Either, you can either by name or anonymously, I don't care, but reach out to me and I will personally get involved in this, as I have in the past. Again, that's why I scare the DoD, is because I'm so involved in this to make sure firefighters are properly tested and properly protected. This is something that, if it is happening, this could be an isolated incident. I don't know, but I've heard it from various sources that it's happening around the country. It needs to stop. It needs to stop immediately. The test is not mandatory. However, I highly encourage anybody that is defined as a firefighter under the 2020 NDAA to get your test, because it starts a baseline. So if you've already had your test, your first test done, and now you're waiting to get your second test, or you had your second test, compare those results. Did your levels go up? Did they go down? Also, go to the DoD PFAS, the DoD firefighter PFAS blood test survey that I created. It is not endorsed. It is not sanctioned by the DoD. It is simply a title I put up there to try to capture. And I showed this data at the conference, how bad active duty and former DoD military firefighters are exposed. And it is a concern amongst researchers and those that were at the conference, because this information is not being publicized. Matter of fact, you heard me say this before. The DoD Inspector General's office has said the DoD overall has no intention of tracking, trending, or analyzing PFAS blood test data. So if they're not doing it, somebody else has to, and that's why I sort of took it upon myself before that IG report even come out to start tracking, collecting some data. So I'm working with some other researchers to get more testing done. So that you'll hear me talk about that in the coming months here. Big thing here is those with an occupational specialty as a firefighter but do not receive an occupational medical exam are ineligible. So what this means is that, say, firefighter Snuffy is a firefighter for 10 years, decides to become a first sergeant, decides to become a recruiter, some other special duty assignment. Once they enter into that assignment, they are no longer considered a firefighter as defined by the 2020 NDAA, and therefore they are ineligible for PFAS blood testing. So, but when they come back into the career field, then they become eligible, and then they can go ahead and get a blood test. So my issue with that is just because you move over to another career field does not mean that PFAS exposure, that contamination magically stops or magically goes away. It's just like when we retire, we separate from the military, we go from active duty to former. Once we walk out that front gate fence, that front gate or that fence line, all of our conditions, medical conditions, whatever, things that we were exposed to do not magically stop, leave our body and park themselves at the gate, and then we walk out, illness free. We carry that stuff with us for literally a lifetime. That's why PFAS chemicals are considered forever chemicals. We carry those for a lifetime. So the DoD, the military, really has to do better. Once you're a firefighter, if you're still serving, you really need to get tested every year. Same thing with your occupational health exam. So it may not be PFAS that is linked to an illness or cancer. It could be something else. It could be products of exposure. And that's something I talked about down there as well, is that, look at all the products out there that have PFAS chemicals in them. So you may not be exposed to AFFF, you may not be exposed to turnout gear, but there's products of combustion. And I really nail volunteer firefighters, especially up here, being the in-house safety officer here with my department, is that if you don't have your mask on, your ass is out on the curb by the truck, you need to decon yourself, because all of those products, say like, stain resistant carpeting, furniture, there's thousands of products that have PFAS in it. During a structure fire, those things are burning. They are off-gassing. They are producing PFAS emissions. You're either inhaling them, if you want to be one of these Johnny Bravo dumbasses out there that like breathing smoke, you're inhaling all of those products of combustion and increasing your risk of occupational cancer. Your skin is absorbing it, because we know through research that turnout gear does not create a solid barrier between your skin, and the environment you're exposed to. We've seen the testing to where these products of combustion get through the openings underneath turnout gear, and are absorbed. They come in contact with your skin, your uniforms. We've seen the black lights testing on that to show this happen. So again, if you are, if you go into a structure fire, anything where there's smoke, even wildfires and stuff like that, they're finding PFAS chemicals, in wildfire service as well. Make sure you decon yourself. Make sure you wear your PPE properly, and at all times. If you're not wearing it, I'm talking to the fire chiefs and the safety officers out there. Pull your personnel out of the building, rip their ass, and then tell them before you go back in, you will wear SCBA, you will wear proper PPE. We have to do this, folks. We have to because right now, the number one line of duty death is occupational cancer among firefighters. It used to be cardiac stress related. It's now cancer. We can minimize exposure. We can be proactive with this. So if you're not doing it, start doing it. If you're a firefighter within a firehouse and you observe these things going on, don't be afraid to speak up. Because at the end of the day, your life safety is in your hands. Don't count on somebody else. It's your life safety. You're responsible for it. You're the first line of defense. So step up and do the right thing. So I talked about, with blood testing, the CDC and NHANES PFAS averages. The ATSDR uses the geomean. Those that are getting DoD blood testing, you're going to see they use that 95th percentile, and they love using that 95th percentile because it's a higher level. So if you look at PFOS, 18.3 nanogram per milliliter is your 95th percentile. So what the CDC says is that 95% of the population they surveyed, or the U.S. population, they believe, based on what the research they did, that 95% of the population has at or below 18.3 nanogram per milliliter of PFAS in their blood. But when you look at the geometric mean, it's 4.72. So that's something that you really need to look at, is that geo mean, because it takes all of those outliers that may be there and brings them down to a more accurate number. So not only does the CDC have the geo mean, but the ATSDR does as well. So the more folks that are jumping on the geo mean, the better. I use that when I analyze blood test results for folks when they send me their information. So it's a little bit more accurate, and that's why we see the higher numbers. If we went with a higher level, like the 95th percentile, the number of those that have elevated levels would be lower, obviously, and the stats would not be as significant. So that's, in my opinion, that's why the DoD is using that 95th percentile, so it doesn't look like the problem that they have created and continue to have is not as significant as it would show if they went with the geo mean. So these charts that I have up here, they're slightly outdated, because as I was down at the conference, people were putting data into the DoD Firefighter PFAS survey. So for this one here, the percentage of all DoD firefighters with PFAS levels. Now this includes active duty and former. PFOS was about 51.28% have elevated levels above that geometric mean. Shockingly, 94.87% have elevated PFHXS. Now, the DoD is really focusing only on PFOS, PFOS, and PFOA. They're not really talking about PFHXS. But if you attended the conference down there were researchers and other individuals that were mentioning PFHXS because it is tied, or they're associating it with various forms of cancer, and contamination. So we really need to start talking about that. When we look at the active duty folks, 98.28% have elevated PFHXS levels. So damn near everybody in the military is going to have high levels of PFHXS. Where is that contamination coming from? We're not there yet to actually fingerprint this compound to various products. When we find this in the human body, we can't say today, okay, Kevin, you've got elevated PFHXS in your body. We can't fingerprint and say some of your PFHXS came from AFFF, it came from turnout gear, it came from Teflon pans, it came from stain-resistant carpeting or furniture, outdoor clothing, that type of thing. Researchers are working on that, but because you've got about 12,000, somebody had mentioned about 12,000 PFAS chemicals during the conference. It's a little difficult to do. Yes, they're focusing on these 6 that we know of, but again, thousands of products out there that have PFAS in it. Manufacturers are not required to divulge the ingredients in their products. It's taken legal action, independent testing to literally find out that firefighting foam had PFAS in it, turnout gear had PFAS in it. These manufacturers, whether it's the chemical manufacturers, the garment manufacturers, the fabric manufacturers, the distributors of these products, they're not saying what's in these products because they fall back, well, it's not regulated, we're not required to, it's industry trade secrets. If we divulge that, then we lose our competitiveness. So again, they're putting profits over lives. You should, just like when you go to a grocery store, you should be able to see an ingredient list and make an informed decision. Yes, this product has PFAS. No, that one doesn't. However, the one that has PFAS in it is a little bit more durable. It has, certain characteristics that we would rather have over the non-fluorinated gear. So it's that risk assessment, that informed decision that has to happen, but we really can't make an informed decision yet because we don't have the ingredient list. So that's something we're working on, is to force ingredient list. And the legislation that's currently resting, I think, in the House now, to prohibit PFAS laced firefighting foam, it has a provision in there to require manufacturers to put a warning label on the product, sort of like Big Tobacco did on the cigarettes. Oh, this product may cause cancer, blah blah blah. Not sure what the warning label is going to say. I didn't see it in the bill, but it could be something similar, or it could require them to say this product contains PFAS. So we'll wait to see. But like I said earlier in the podcast, I gotta speak with the legislators and say, look, don't pin this on firefighters. Don't punish the firefighters for using it by giving them a $5,000 and then $10,000 fine. Punish the manufacturers that are providing this, and then alleviating themselves from any type of liability. So, you've heard me talk about my personal PFAS levels: PFOS, PFNA, PFH. PS, PFOA, PFHXS. So Eurofins was there. Andrew from Eurofins, he was on my podcast. They do a really great job at breaking down the PFAS compounds. They actually test for 40 plus, whereas other folks are only testing for about 6. So do I encourage everybody to use Eurofins? Again, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to provide a link to their page, as I always do, and we'll talk about it here a little bit more. But you notice here, like I said in previous podcasts, TRICARE PFOA test they did back in 2020. It resulted in a non-detected, which does not surprise me. Makes me question their methodology of testing, but somehow Eurofins found 1.46 nanogram of PFOA in my body. So it's if we, let me scroll back up here to the CDC. So the lab reporting limit on PFOA is actually 0.5 nanogram per milliliter. So, mine was 1.46. So why TRICARE, the military, didn't find anything, I don't know. And that's something I also tell individuals out there, is like, I'll be more than happy to talk about some of the labs out there, but you really gotta do your own homework and make that informed decision as to which lab you want to go to. There's one in California. There's a couple other labs out there. I believe the ones that the DoD is currently using are looking at going public, offering a public test now, because more and more people throughout the world are demanding blood tests. It's not just military firefighters. There's communities out there that are like, look, we need a blood test available for our citizens to go ahead and take. And some of those require a vial of blood. You got to go to a lab. They got to actually draw blood, put it in a vial. Whereas Eurofins, it's a finger prick test. You dab 4 swabs, you mail it in. 10 days later, approximately, you get your results via email. There's from what I understand, there's some legal issues. Like if you go to court or whatever, if you get a finger swab, a finger prick and a swab, it may not be, the courts may not accept that, whereas an actual vial of blood is more accepted. But with technology changing, so could the the requirements for courts, that could change as well. So they may look at, hey, this is a much easier way to do this. I think the biggest thing that they're probably looking at is what type of environment did you do your finger prick and swab test in? Like for me, I did it in the kitchen table. Courts may come back and be like, well, that's not a sterile environment. There was the potential for cross contamination. Did you properly, use the alcohol swabs to clean your fingers? A lot of things in there. Whereas if you go to a lab, go to your doctor, they draw the blood. It's in a sterile environment, and it's you see where I'm going with all of this. So we'll have to just wait and see how the courts accept a finger prick swab test, if they even will. So next slide, just a little bit closer up of what my results are, and I have no problem putting my results out there. But again, 22. Where's it at here? It's looking at the serum equivalent. Yeah, PFAS. My PFAS was 22.8 nanogram per milliliter, way over the geometric mean, and that's 30 years after my first exposure. So there's folks out there. I've been seeing results. There was one, I think they had like 56 on PFHXS, which is insane, and that was right off of their test results. So it wasn't a fat finger. They didn't jack the numbers up. That's what was reported on their test results. So that's a little scary. So it was funny. The entire time I sat at the conference, I was sitting with a really nice lady there, and we didn't say anything during the entire conference. Now, mind you, I had to get out of there Friday. I actually flew out Friday morning. I had some things to take care of back here in Pennsylvania, so I missed Friday's conference. So Thursday, after my speech, I come back, and yes, folks, I did get emotional during the speech, so I have no problem saying that. But I sat next to this lady, and I sat down, and she's like, "Are you serious?" She goes, "I've been sitting next to you the entire time." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she slides me her card, and here she's the senior toxicologist for the VA, and I'm like, "Get out of town." So we got to talking and everything for a short amount of time. We're gonna network. We're gonna talk some more, but in terms of the Veterans Affairs PFAS stance. And I said this during my talk, you go on their website, it clearly states there's a little, highlighted block on their page with PFAS that says they don't recommend blood tests to determine any PFAS levels in an individual. And it's because most individuals already have PFAS in their blood. And I talked to somebody yesterday about this, and, absolutely agree. It's because, we've been exposed to thousands of products, knowingly or unknowingly, that contain PFAS. Whereas when researchers are looking at how much PFAS does it take to see illnesses, cancers develop, those lab mice, those lab animals are pretty much, I'm probably using the wrong word, but I say sterile, in terms of they've never been exposed to PFAS. They're bred, these lab mice, these lab animals are intentionally bred that way. They're a clean mouse, a clean rat, whatever. So when they expose these lab mice to PFAS, that is the first time those animals are being subjected to that exposure. So scientists can with a lot of accuracy say, okay, this is how much PFAS this animal was subjected to over this course of time, and at this point we saw tumors develop. We saw, organ function diminish, behavioral characteristics change, all of these things that they're looking for that PFAS has an impact on. They're able to see that because that mouse has never been, exposed to PFAS. Whereas in humans, we don't know until we don't know what we don't know is always the saying. So until you get a blood test, we don't know how much PFAS is really in your body. So up until I got my more accurate PFAS, I could have walked in and said, yeah, I don't have any PFAS in my body, but I've got all of these different medical conditions. So, and I think that's really what the Air Force did when they were looking at me and the VA in terms of my disability is that, yeah, they're service connected, but we don't know, was it because of PFAS? Was it because of something else? So now we as humans, with blood testing, we can say, yes, you have this amount of PFAS in your body, but that's a snapshot at the time you get your blood test done. So what was your levels 5, 10, 20 years ago? Most likely they were way higher because of that half-life. Over time, PFAS chemicals start to break down, towards zero. It takes quite a long time. So that's, I totally understand the VA's stance on that, and I can appreciate it, but they really need to do blood testing. So if you get that baseline, like I said before, with active duty firefighters, you get the baseline, and then you get tests, follow-on tests, annual tests. You can see if there's a trend. Are your levels stabilized? Are they going up? Or are they going down? The goal is for them to go down as quickly as possible. If they're going up, then we have to figure out, or if they're staying stable or going up, we have to figure out why. And it's very likely it's because you're being re-exposed to something or continuously exposed to something that's causing those levels to maintain or go up. So again, military firefighters, get your blood test, your annual blood test. Don't turn it down. If you're told they can't do it, let me know. We'll get it done. So as you know, Dan Kaysen, Rockstar Dan Kaysen, Neil Hogan, I talked briefly about these two at the conference. I said, to date, these are the only two that I know of that got a 100% disability rating because of their AFFF exposure. And it's because of their Nexus letters. Their oncologists, their clinicians had drafted a letter that said, hey, based on their medical conditions, diagnosis, we believe it is attributed to repeated years of AFFF exposure, PFAS exposure. The VA reviewed all that and granted 100% rating for each one of those. Others out there, it's the VA has turned down because it was, the Nexus letter wasn't strong enough, or they didn't have one, or various influences on there. So if you are diagnosed with illnesses or cancer and you believe, you've been repeatedly exposed to AFFF, PFAS, get with your clinician, get with your oncologist, and explain to them what PFAS is, why you feel there's a correlation between PFAS and your illnesses, and see if they'll draft a Nexus letter if you're going to file a VA claim or refile a claim. Those letters do help. It doesn't hurt to introduce that letter. It hurts if you don't, because again, you're trying to get the VA to acknowledge your illnesses and approve a claim, but if you don't have that evidence, if you don't have that support, you're up against the wall for most people. So the PFAS blood test, as you know, I've talked about this before. You see, it's $3.99. It jumped up from $2.99. It's back up to $3.99. So what they were saying is, like, the first 500. They were going to have like a $2.99. They've obviously gone way past that. I'm talking to Andrew down at the conference. They're getting a lot of orders for this blood test. So thanks to the audience members out there that have purchased this or questioned the test. Wanted more information on it. So again, I encourage you to take a look at this. And acquire it for yourself. Like I said, for me, it was more thorough than any other test out there. So There's a link down there. Again, I'm going to have a link in the podcast description, so I don't have to read that whole URL. So here's where we are on the giveaway. Those, and I said, to be eligible, you have to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And many of you have, many audience members out there have subscribed. What I didn't know at the time is that even though you subscribe, I can only see the list of those that have made their profiles, their channels or whatever, public. So even though I have all of these subscribers in there, I'm only seeing a fraction of those subscribers because many of you have not made your account, your channel, your whatever it is, public. So here's what we're going to do. Within the next couple days or so, and I've posted this on Facebook, go to our Facebook page, and I will have a link in both, whether an audio or YouTube podcast description, where to go to sign up for our newsletter. Okay? And I know it's more work, but hey, it's $3.99, so it's worth it, folks, because you have an opportunity to win a free test on here. So I'm going to provide a link that goes to a newsletter page, a subscription page on AFSO21.com. It's on the home page. You scroll down, you'll see a subscribe there. You put an email address in there. Again, if it's your actual email address, I'm not looking for phone numbers. I'm not looking for names, anything like that. It's an email. So if you want to remain anonymous, that's perfectly fine. I get it. Create, an anonymous Gmail account, put it in there. Don't hit me with a lot of spam. I know there's some within the DoD that have been trying to do that. I've caught you. I've got you blocked, got you reported. So I'd say about 99% of my audience members are true, faithful, and I appreciate that. So yeah, what we're going to do is have you go through, and I apologize for all this inconvenience, folks, but I didn't know it at the time when we said we were going to give away on YouTube a free test, that I could only see a fraction of subscribers. So what I'm asking you to do, if you want to be eligible to get a free PFAS blood test that we're going to give away, myself, AFSO 21, weekend wrap up, Eurofins, it's valued at $3.99. Go to AFSO21.com, scroll down to the subscribe, plug your email in there, and then hit submit. And then I'll see the subscribers on there. So, and then we'll pick a winner from those subscribers. So plus the fact that if you subscribe to AFSO 21, I can go ahead and reach out and say, hey, this is where we're going to be speaking. These are events that are coming up, like the 5th annual Firefighter Health and Safety Conference out in exotic Beaver Creek. I can go ahead and email you that information and get you better informed things. Plus, the 4th PFAS conference, when they have it, where it's going to be and what time and stuff like that. So again, I apologize. It's something I caught. I wanted to let everybody know. If you want to be eligible to win a free PFAS exposure blood test, actually, it's going to be, I think it's like $3.99. I think it's not completely free. I think the code is going to bring it down to $3.99. They can't give it away for free. It's something on their end. So it's $3.99. Still, would you rather pay $3.99 or $399? So I would choose the $3.99. So sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our page, and then we'll go from there. So I appreciate it, folks. So I wanted to talk about the EPA's interim health advisories. Now, I'm sure most of you, and I wanted to finish the podcast up with this. They kicked off the conference down there June 15th. EPA rep had come in and she said, "Hey, we've got this news." Now we had already heard it was coming. They were going to do, an official press release and everything that day, but we just happened to have an EPA rep there to kick off the conference, and they said, "Hey, we've come up with new lifetime health advisories for certain PFAS compounds." So they come out and they said, "Okay, we've got this updated interim health advisory for PFOA." So now, mind you, back in 2016, the EPA had developed lifetime health advisories for PFAS plus PFOA at 70 parts per trillion in drinking water. Now, the way they figured it out is 154-pound male drinks 2 liters of water a day, 70 parts per trillion consumption in those 2 liters should not make that individual sick. Well, their research, their scientists, public pressure, peer pressure, everything, they come back and they reevaluated that and they said, maybe we were wrong. So they changed it from 70 parts per trillion. And the interim, and it's effective immediately. This is legit, folks. Their interim updated health advisory for PFOA is now 0.004 parts per trillion. So they went from 70 parts per trillion down to 0.004 parts per trillion. And as the EPA rep had stated, all water systems, all drinking water in the United States and probably the world is polluted with PFAS, which was, if you would have heard the audience just explode when she said that opens up so many doors. It also opens up a lot of can of worms in some communities. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. So the interim updated health advisory for PFOS, went from 70 parts per trillion to 0.02 parts per trillion. The final health advisory for Gen X chemicals is 10 parts per trillion. And the final health advisory for PFBS is 2,000 parts per trillion. And those watching on YouTube, there's a link there. I'm also going to have this in the podcast description, so don't worry about trying to jot this down before I change slides here real quick. So it's a PDF. It's a fact sheet that comes up, talks about these new health advisories. So the DoD, they come out with a draft performance specifications for fire extinguishing agents. So somebody had sent me a link to this. I didn't know they had sent something out until I read this, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. It's a draft, and those familiar with the military, this publicly released draft has very likely changed since it was released, and probably will so up until its final version and approval by headquarters, Secretary of Defense, all that stuff. So in this draft, paragraph 3.3.3, PFAS content, it says the concentrate, now we're talking about this new non-fluorinated foam, the concentrate shall not contain more than 1 part per billion of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, as determined by its total fluorine. And then it references content, see 4.4.5 and 4.5.7, which I didn't put up here on the slide. So this is very interesting because this draft was sent out prior to the EPA's interim and final determinations. So the Air Force, the DoD, was looking at, they were still following the 70 parts per trillion. The PPT, the 70 PPT or parts per trillion guidance, lifetime health advisory by the EPA when they did this draft. Since then, the EPA has modified those levels to 0. Let's just be realistic, folks. 0.004 and 0.02 is 0. Okay, these are parts per trillion. It's 0. So pretty much you have to have clean water. That's really what they're saying. If you have any amounts, beyond 0, your water is contaminated. So So when we look at PFOA, if it's 0.004, and folks, the audience members out there, if my math is incorrect, it wasn't a pass. Somebody caught it, and I apologized. If my math is incorrect on this, let me know. But calculations I come up with for PFOA, 0.004 parts per trillion converts to 0.0000004 parts per billion. I think that calculation's right. If not, let me know, and I'll apologize greatly again. But as you can see, it starts adding zeros to that. So that 0.004 parts per trillion, okay, we've got it. But since the DoD in their draft says it cannot contain more than 1 part per billion, well, folks, holy hell, PFOA, you've got you got a decimal point, 5 zeros, and then a 4. So in essence, and this goes along, PFAS, it goes from 0.02 parts per trillion to 0.00002 parts per billion. Gen X, 10 parts per trillion, it puts it down to 0.01 parts per billion. PFBS, 2,000 parts per trillion, puts it at 2 parts per billion. So the way I interpret this, and researchers out there, audience members, if I'm looking at this wrong, please let me know. I try to provide you with accurate information. Sometimes I get it wrong. It's rare because I have such a great network of folks out there that are looking at this, but I wanted to put something out here today. So again, if my calculations are off, let me know. But the way I interpret this statement, the DoD, in light of the EPA's new guidance, they're going to have to go back and revise this draft. They're going to have to. They have no choice, because they're going to be in violation of the health advisory. And I think this is. They didn't really come out and say it's because it's just an advisory. There's no regulations on this yet, but do the right thing. If it says for PFOA, the interim lifetime health advisory of this is 0.004 parts per trillion, make it that. Don't make it 1 part per billion, which is going to be over, because that's just going to show the Air Force or the DoD doesn't care whether you're exposed or not. That's how I interpret it. And it's very likely they may just keep it at 1 part per trillion. It's just like, nah, who cares? But we'll wait and see. But my interpretation, my opinion is that they're going to have to go back and change this draft. And also the 6 non-fluorinated foams that they're currently testing out at China Lake, which is a complete disaster site. It's just saturated with PFAS out there. But the military said, hey, let's just go test it out there. It's already contaminated. Screw it. Let's just add more to it. That's the mentality, folks. And again, that's why I scare the DoD, because I'm not afraid to say that. Whereas the DoD leaders are. Somebody should have said, no, let's not add more contaminants to that area. We already have to clean it up. Why would we add more? Whether it's the manufacturers are saying it's non-fluorinated or not. How do you know? Did you test it, or are you just taking their word for it? Most likely they're just taking their word from these manufacturers, just like they took their word from 3M back in the 60s. It says, oh, AFFF, it's perfectly fine. It's soap and water. And then DuPont jumped on board. And then Chemours jumped on board. And then National Foam jumped on board and said, oh, yeah, it's just soap and water. Took their word for it. And guess what? Here we are, 2022. We know for a fact that their foam that they produced for decades contained PFAS. They knew about it, never said anything. So is the DoD just, again, repeating history, taking their word for it, saying, oh, it's perfectly fine. It's safe. It's much safer than the old C6 foam. And then 50, 60 years down the road, we come back and be like, oh, yeah, we screwed up again. Yeah, I totally think that's going to happen. So anyhow, before I get really pissed off here, see, I'm saving the best for last. I'm saving the best for last, folks. So yeah, with the foams that they're currently testing and evaluating, from what I understand, they're down to 6. They're going to have to go back and say, look, EPA just came out with this. Your foam is going to have to go ahead and come under this 0.004 for PFOA and 0.02 for PFAS. Otherwise, we can't. We should not. We cannot take it because once the DoD, let's do a hypothetical here. Say the DoD, the manufacturer, pumps this stuff out. It's got higher than what the EPA, higher PFAS levels than what the EPA considers as a lifetime health advisory. DoD purchases, does a mass purchase on this, equips all 3,500, apparatus, 3,500 plus or minus apparatus, hanger systems. They end up releasing this, whether intentional or accidental. Now you've got an environmental cleanup to deal with. Now, who's responsible for that environmental cleanup? Because when they come in and they test and they say, hey, guess what? Your PFAS levels are now 5.3 because that's what was in the foam. And we're just throwing hypotheticals out there. Who's going to be liable for that? Is it going to be the end user, the fire department? Is it going to be the service branch, Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, Department of Defense overall? Or is it going to be the manufacturer who deceived or may have deceived the purchaser, i.e. the Department of Defense or service branch end user, into believing their non-fluorinated foam was safe when it turns out it wasn't? And this is why we rely on independent researchers, independent testing, non-biased, like I talked about at the beginning of the podcast, to do this testing. Because, folks, I'm not going to take the word of manufacturers who, for decades, intentionally deceived their own employees, local community members, and the general public into believing their products were perfectly safe or are perfectly safe. I'm not gonna drink the Kool-Aid that they're handing out, because that Kool-Aid contains PFAS. And I'm not saying Kool-Aid does. This is just I'm throwing it out there. It's that's the mentality, folks, is that these manufacturers want us to believe because, I'm big chemical company, I said so, and you must believe me. Bullshit. Big Tobacco did the same thing. Big Pharma did the same thing for multiple things. And people bought into it. They said, why would these people lie to us? Oh my God, they're selling this product. Why would they intentionally harm us? Folks, it's profits over lives. Profits over lives. These people, as long as these CEOs, these presidents, these executives make money, they're out in the Caribbean. They're out hobnobbing. They're out spending money left and right, enjoying life. Meanwhile, they're very likely polluting communities and poisoning individuals. But yet, they want you to believe, our products are perfectly safe, until individuals do independent testing and say, wait a second, we come across this, your own documents, or we did independent testing and we found your products to contain these toxins. Care to explain? And then all of a sudden they clam up. So again, how this EPA new guidance is going to affect the DoD's requirement, because the NDAA mandates that the DoD has to go to a non-fluorinated foam. I believe it's fiscal year 24. So it's either fiscal year 24 or fiscal year 25. I got to go back and look, but shortly. I mean, it's coming here soon. They have to go to a non-fluorinated foam. So how is this does this throw a wrench into everything? And now they got to go back to the drawing board? Or are they just going to say, well, we're too late in the game. We gotta press on with what we got. And then we'll just come up with some processes, some prevention plans here later on. So it's going to be very interesting as to what happens. And I think that's my last slide, folks, those that are watching on YouTube. So, yeah, folks, like I said, I mean, this one, we've talked for a while here. My timer, hopefully everything was recording and I don't have to do this again because I see my timer is at like 1 second. So I'm hoping everything went well. But yeah, like I said, audience members, I appreciate your support. I appreciate the information that you've been sending me. I appreciate the questions. I am here as an advocate, as an ally for those that are exposed, firefighters, and really it's. I keep saying firefighters, but it's for everybody out there. Firefighters, their families, those that live, work, and play on military installations or around them, innocent community members within our local communities, municipalities, you name it. I am the guy. While I scare the DoD, I am also here to go ahead and help the DoD and help everybody to avoid unnecessary contamination or exposure to PFAS chemicals. However the stuff finds its way from manufacturer to you, we all need to work together to isolate those routes of exposure and get our drinking water back to safe conditions, because we can't change the past, we can change the future, and that's what we're trying to do. So, and one thing I talked about, I said at the conference, and this is where I broke down, was that, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And after I said that, I'm thinking that could work in various ways. And I've always used it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When's my doctor going to tell me, hey, Kev, you're sick, you've got cancer? But I also look at it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When are we going to succeed in this fight against PFAS and hold those accountable that are manufacturing these poisons and intentionally putting them in products that we use every day and not tell us that they're in there. So, and when is PFAS going to be regulated? So, reach out to your local politicians, your local state, federal politicians, congressional members, and demand action on PFAS and legislator. Stop dragging these bills through the mud. Forcing them to take years before any action is done. Stop dividing yourselves by, political affiliation. This is a global issue. It affects everybody. PFAS doesn't differentiate between, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, American, European, all of that stuff. It does not care. It's going to impact you one way or another, and it's going to impact you negatively. So we as a global community need to step up, do what's right. If you see something that's wrong, if you see something that just weighs in the back of your mind and irks you, stand up, have the courage to stand up and say something. Be that team member, that warrior on the fight against PFAS. Because I've always said strength in numbers. We're getting the numbers. That's why the DoD is scared. That's why the foam manufacturers, the PFAS manufacturers, are scared of the public outcry on this. And the strength in numbers, the more folks we have, the louder our voice, the more organized we are, and we will win this fight. So with that, folks, I'm losing my voice. And like I said, I hope this thing recorded. If not, we'll do a take two and it'll be even better. But yeah, with that, that's going to do it for this episode, folks. Again, I appreciate everybody, tuning in, subscribing. If you haven't done so, please hit the like buttons to subscribe, hit the bell, whatever's out there that lets me know you're listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I look forward to another informative episode. We're going to try to get some guests on there that I networked with. down at the conference. So until then, folks, that's going to do it. As always, stay safe, keep supporting your fire emergency services, and folks, until next time, I'm out of here.
Veteran-owned and operated AFSO 21 Agile Fire Service Organization for the 21st century applies their extensive background in fire protection and emergency services to deliver support with identifying, developing, implementing, and maintaining strategies and techniques essential to operate and sustain an emergency response organization. AFSO 21 services include staffing analysis, risk assessment, standards of cover, training, management, and financial reviews. AFSO 21 is prepared to support your organization with increasing your capabilities values. For more information, please go to afso21.com. That's AFSO21.com.